Great, that's perfect because this is going to be a introduction to mammalian design. It's mostly going to be focused on really just looking at some concepts or issues that a lot of people probably wouldn't have even thought about it when it comes to pets in general, and that's pretty much some of the examples I'm going to be giving is an example of my own pet and some things I'd like to share about that. And then, at the end of the discussion, I will at this point also just mention that I'll be able to share a workshop that I will do that'll get into more of the specifics. So I did want to just let everybody know that we're not getting into teaching you all about the mammalian design, although you'll learn quite a bit. But we'll be doing something like that a little later if you're interested. But mostly today I just wanted to talk, and I'll be going through several slides, so I'm going to ask Nayla to move to slides as we go through, and you'll have to bear with me. But here we have what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through science and history just very briefly, talk and show you the difference between a human and a mammal design, touch on some of the mammalian themes, and really wanted to do that so that you see that even though there's a matrix that appears to have similar gaits as us, for example, in our own human designs, there's different themes that apply to mammals. We'll talk about conditioning, a little glimpse into the future, and then some more options if you're interested in learning more about mammalian design. So just a little background on myself so you know who you're speaking with. I am a 4-6 pure generator. I've been studying human design for as long as Nayla has, so we've been together for a while now. And I am a certified analyst, a guide, a family analyst. I'm also a BG5 consultant, which gets into the business side of human design and kind of looks at things from a material perspective. But I was really fascinated by the various forms, life forms, and different matrices that Ra was introduced to when he was given information about the human design system. And one in particular was the mammalian design, and that's because I shared a very strong affinity towards pets, a dog that I had in particular, which I'll introduce you to today. And so I did study life matrices, and I also studied for a 12-hour class with Dr. Andrea Reichel-Wolf. You may have heard her name before. She's been involved with human design for quite a while. She's also studied genetics, and she is a doctor of genetics, so she has quite a scientific background. So she took a very hard look at a lot of the biology and a lot of the things that have been available from Ra in terms of mammals, especially since she had the luxury of raising horses and having exact times of birth in which to do that. So she was able to validate a lot of the information that she had received from Ra in terms of mammalian design. So I'll let you go to the next slide for me. So just to kind of get you oriented, you'll see here that there are 6 life matrices. There's actually more than 6 matrices when it comes to different forms that Ra has shared with us, but these are the ones that we would consider to be alive. So, what you'll see here, and I don't have my pointer, so I'll just talk about the things from, for example, the upper row would be the one on the left upper row would show you what the design, thank you, that's the plants. Those are the actual life form that we would see in terms of any plant life. And the one opposite that on the top row over to the right-hand side, that's the one we're going to be looking at today. That's mammalian design. Now down at the bottom, and again back on the left-hand side, you'll see that this is actually what it takes for something to be considered alive. So it does require that there is two gates that connect two centers for there to be what we call life force. And this is just an example of, a cell that would be alive. And then we have next to that what would be considered the fish, reptile, this one is the insects. So this particular form would be what an insect would have. And then next to that would be an example of a category that includes fish, reptiles, and birds. And of course, the very last one is what we're all familiar with, and that's human design. So there's going to be obviously a difference when it comes to the various centers, biological functions that are considered a part of their matrix, and also the number of centers, gates, etc. that are activated or potentially activated. So moving to the next slide, we'll be looking today at the category of mammals. And mammals, as you can see, here's an example of all the different kinds of mammals. So what we talk about today, this would apply to any mammal. So if we were to step back and say, what is a mammal from a scientific perspective, the scientific criteria for that, in other words, what qualifies for something to be a mammal, is that all mammals have a mammary and sweat glands, and they also have hair. They have 3 middle ear bones, and they do have a neocortex. Although I'll show you that there is quite a difference in terms of the size of the neocortex from humans. Now, some mammals, most in particular, also give birth to their young. They have some teeth. They do have a placenta in which the young is inside right before it's born, and they do have a 4-chambered heart. So that's what is, from a scientific perspective, what we're considering to be mammals. And we, of course, are in that category. So I'll let you go to the next slide. And we'll begin by talking a little bit about the domestication of mammals. Now, basically, mammals are considered to be wild. And, we as humans really are separated from what we'll consider to be most mammals. But through the years, there's a relationship and a bond that's formed. And it depends on, history, when some of the various mammals did become domesticated. And what I mean by domesticated is that over time, mammals, although they are considered to be separate and afraid of humans, they began to have a relationship to some degree, a bond, a bargain, some type of a give and take, whether it's an exchange for, in the case of a dog, perhaps food and shelter for what turned out to be either work that they would do for a human, or protection, or warmth. In some cases in history, back in the American Indian days, you'll see pictures where the Indians actually used dogs for pack, animals. They would load up all their tents on their backs and use them to move from, river to river or across the plains. And, in Alaska, they've used dogs and to, basically maneuver over the snow to get, behind I don't know if you've ever seen those sleighs, but the dog packs that actually do all the effort, basically to carry humans and, again, all their belongings across some pretty amazing land. And, these relationships that are that have been formed, dogs were actually one of the very first to become domesticated. And if you do go on the internet and do some research, you'll find that, the actual distance or time in which dogs began to domesticate towards humans has been, really a debate. I put down here 10,000 years BC because that is what, I was taught in Dr. Andrea's class. But I've seen anything up to 15,000 BC, depending on, where you look on the internet. And where they're basing that on is that they found sites where dogs were basically buried with humans. And so there was a care taken by humans to really make sure when a dog died that its spirit, its body was taken care of. And that really is a sign that there was a close relationship and bond that had been formed. We also find that sheep and goats, were bred and cared for and herded, and that goes all the way back to 9,000, 7,000 BC. And, from there, it, turned into the same time pigs and cattle. And, of course, you can imagine that that was for purposes, again, that are mutually beneficial. We have humans that were taking advantage of perhaps the hair or the milk or perhaps the meat. A lot of these relationships have to do with food. We're going back to prehistoric times. And although in the case of the dogs, humans for the most part were not eating dogs, their relationship was that they basically bonded because they discovered they both did eat meat. And so the dogs would scavenger and follow the packs of humans as they were migrating and get whatever was left over. Over time, they perhaps would provide some protection, warning for people who were infiltrating perhaps their tribe. But they also were able to, because of their strong sense of smell, they were being able to be hunters as well and support, humans to be able to find and to kill food along the way. So as you can go through this transition, these different historical things, you'll see that there's many, many different ways in which the domestication of mammals has taken place. But there is a bargain between the two. And it, for the most part, has to do with survival. So it was about food, it was about resources, it was about let's join forces and together we'll be able to survive in a way that is more difficult if we're separate. And so there was a leaving, if you want to call it that, of the wildlife to some degree for all of these animals as they became more and more domesticated. Now, in this domestication, the assumption is, of course, and what did transpire, is that the humans became the top of the food chain. And they were the ones that became what you would consider in the animal world to be the alpha. So if you'll move to the next slide, I'll give you a little bit of an insight into, the whole way the matrix calculation takes place. Now, in some of your studies, you've been able to see this mandala, this wheel that shows all the various 64 hexagrams that can be imprinted depending on your time of birth. And in the case of humans, we base that on, for the most part, where the sun was at the time of birth. So it's usually a solar calculation for humans. What's different for mammals is that we base the calculation similar to what we do with reflectors, and we look at their calculation from a lunar perspective. So there's also only 15 gates in this matrix, and you'll see, those 15 gates are actually the ones that are colored in the outside wheel where the numbers are. And so basically, They have a personality crystal, just like humans do. So that's another very different thing. They're the only matrix, I believe, other than humans that have a personality crystal. And they do have, although it does look like it's in the same database, they do have a different database. Their gates have a little bit different theme and genetic composition. So they're going to have a different way that you would do a reading, for example, or a different way you would internalize or analyze the various gate activations. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll take a look at some other differences. Basically, the human design has 9 activated centers as a possibility. In mammalian matrices, we only have 5. And again, instead of 64 gates, we have 15. And the focus of life force is on 6 channels. So, you know, these combination of the personality side, the side that we think we are, the black, the part that's conscious in humans, and then the side that is what we call the design side, the red side, that is also common for in the mammalian matrix. So you do have a calculation that'll take a look at, you know, what is an unconscious, inaccessible part for, you know, the mammals. So, for example, if you have a pet, you can rest assured that there are very conscious aspects to the pet. And just like in humans, there's another side that is also very unconscious and operates in more of a mysterious or surprising way. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about, you know, just looking at this other way we have a difference. The mammalian design, you'll notice, is not vertical and upright like you see on the right-hand side. The right-hand side shows you the 9-centered being. So we have a vertical way that we look at it. And you can imagine, you know, as humans, you know, through our evolutionary track, we did stand upright, and this is the way that we go through most of our waking hours. The mammalians, however, for the most part, are in a horizontal position. If you think about a dog, a cat, cattle, any of those things that we were describing, you know, basically their throat center, which, Nyla, if you would just highlight the throat center here on the right-hand side of the mammalian, you'll be able to see that's the orientation that we have for the mammals. And again, you can see, you know, this is a completely different matrix. Now what's interesting is that it happens to be exactly the matrix that every single human reverts back into when we're sleeping at night. So some of you may have heard of what we call a dream rave. And, you know, as you go to sleep at night, all of us revert back to what we consider to be this particular matrix. So it's almost like slipping out of one form into another. Now you'll notice that there's aspects of what we consider to be in our waking state to be a part of who we are. There's a head center. There's an ajna center, all about the mind, as an example. And there's, you know, other centers that are activated within human matrix that are not existing in the mammalian matrix. But we do revert back into this form, and so it really is like a reflection of where we originated. You know, along the path we were at one point back in our evolution a mammal that did have 5 centers. And then through the years we evolved until we became, you know, the 7-centered being that in the ABC class you studied briefly. You'll get into that a little bit more in rave cartography. And then we'll also, you know, evolved into what we are today, which is the 9-centered Homo sapien and Transitus. And in time, we're going to migrate again into a more of a matured seven-centered being. And I say we, meaning where life is taking the world, not you and I in particular, because in 2027, as you may have known, we're going to go through another mutation. And some of those babies that are born in 2027 will become what we call a rave. Still a nine-centered being, but operating in a very, very different way than human sapien intransitus babies that will be also continuing to be born after 2027. So if you go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about this difference in this matrix. So here you'll see that I've colored in those centers that in the mammalian design are active. And again, you see that, we have what's open or missing in the matrix of mammalian design is the head center. A lot of people with their pets project that they have the same way of thinking and conceptualizing that we do. And it's actually not true. So it's interesting because, I had an amazing relationship with my dog, who, again, you're going to meet in a couple of minutes. And, I would have sworn, during most of the time I was raising her, that we were definitely on the same wavelength, that she had an uncanny way of reading my mind and being able to communicate with her almost as if she knew what I was thinking. And I could just talk to her with a language in a way that she acted like she knew exactly what I was saying. So I would have never guessed that, she had a completely different way of processing. We also project onto mammals that they have this emotional center, that they have feelings like we do. But as you can see, there is a missing solar plexus in terms of an emotional or feeling orientation to how they have an awareness of the world around them. So you can consider mammals to be somewhat emotionless, non-emotional is probably a better way to say it. You can consider that yes, they do have brains. They do function in some capacity to conceptualize, but it is completely different than the way we do. And it's not that they have premeditated thoughts, like, if they get mad at you as a pet, that they actually think through what they're going to do about it. It is very different, and we do like to project all of these stories onto our pets. They also are very egoless. And a lot of times we can look at pets and think, about how loving they are and how non-judgmental they are, how selfless, they are. And it's true. There is no ego when it comes to how they behave in the world. What you'll also notice, though, is the flip side. What do they have? What are they all about? Well, for one thing, they are about communication. They are able to express themselves. They are about taking action in the moment, being able to survive through the splenic system. The awareness that they have is all about the splenic awareness, intuitive instinct. That's the only awareness that this particular matrix has. So everything about body sensations, what's going to keep them safe, is coming from their splenic system. They, of course, are full of life force, as you can see with the sacral center, and taking in life force on the planet through that open center, or it can be activated in their design. And you'll also see that, they are able to experience a fuel to get into action, a stress and pressure that belongs in the realm of the root center, which is not what's appearing on the side, right, the one right below that. So thank you, Nayla. I'm really appreciating your contributions here as we're moving through these charts. If we go to the next slide, I just wanted to, share another little interesting tidbit about, the whole aspect of thinking and, again, some of the differences we have with mammals. And one of those things is that over time, they've actually shown that the more you domesticate a mammal, and so you can see, all of these different mammals listed here on this chart, over time they measured the neocortex. The neocortex is where we do process, and conceptualize. It's where you can measure intelligence or, again, it's very much an awareness of also the complexity of what's going on in the way we process signals and, electromagnetic signals that go on in the brain system. And you'll see that, one of the very different things about humans, the reason we are so much at the top of the food chain, so to speak, is because we have a very, very developed, large neocortex in relationship to other mammals. And that's the dark area that you can see in the brain. And as you go down, the monkeys, of course, is, a little bit larger, of course, than dogs or cats. But you can see from this chart that, in the wild form, there's quite a difference in terms of the brain weight, which is, a reflection on what's going on with the way the neocortex processes. So, some of the research done on this, what they formulated is as, mammals, and in some cases they self-domesticated. In other words, it wasn't just about humans going out there capturing a few mammals and bringing them in and putting them in cages or, taking care of them until they raised them and then they didn't know any better. There's some of that, obviously, that took place over time. But there's also the theory that a lot of them self-domesticated. In other words, they were the ones that sort of hung out and found human civilizations and, crept in. And this, but, regardless of how domestication took place, over a period of time, it really does have an implication in terms of how they think. There was a surrendering to some degree in terms of their mental strategic way of living in the world. So they became very, very dependent on us in terms of this safety that we provide, this willingness, if you think about what really takes place, over time, this willingness to give their lives, to be a part of this bargain that we have, this ability to be nurtured by humans. We provide this shelter, we provide food in many cases, safety from predators, and in exchange they were, to some degree, either working for us or giving their lives for us. And it was a bargain that was, pretty much understood in the mammalian world. But you can see basically what was being forfeited in terms of their conceptualizing and surrendering of their intelligence by doing that. If you'll go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the themes that are different in the activations. One of the wonderful things that I've experienced with mammals is this bond. And, whether you have your own bond with animals or not, may have to do with your own human design. There are what we call cross-special gates in the matrix. And when I say cross-special, there's these three gates, the 19th gate, the 12th gate, and the 62nd gate, that if you have that within your design, or the gate that is opposite in the channel of that gate. So for example, in the case of the 19th gate, if you had what's across the channel of, and that's, by the way, in the root center. This is all about needs, and you can see this is sort of a very tribal part of the matrix. This is, when you learn about circuitry, this falls within the tribal circuit. This is really, what brought mammals to this form of needing a tribe. You watch dogs, for example, being very much pack animals, and they do have a sense of tribe. And yet, what links them to humans was what's on the other side, which was in the solar plexus, the 49th gate. And as you study human design, you'll hear that's sometimes called the gate of the butcher. It's really about a gate of being sensitive or not sensitive. It's a gate about the bargain, being sensitive to the tribal needs of others or not. And this is really a cross-special connection that we have with mammals. So I have, for example, the 49th gate. And if I am around any kind of a pet that has the 19th gate, there's this automatic genetic relationship that kicks in. It's like there's this bargain that we have to have for it to be, I guess you could call it legitimate use of our energy. And not that it has to be a negative bargain or someone loses. It's a mutually beneficial bargain, but a bargain nonetheless. A bargain in terms of, I guess because I have the 49th gate, I have this affinity towards wanting to really be a resource. You see that this particular mammalian group is about territory, resources. And the channels that are in this particular group are all going to, pretty much harmonize with some of those themes. We actually get into these in a lot more depth in the workshop I'm going to do. I'm actually going to go through each one of these, and we're going to give examples of how they play out. But another group, in terms of the circuitry of mammals, has to do with more of an individual side. And the gate 12 is also a cross-special gate. So if you have, for example, gate 12, you're probably, without even realizing it, someone that animals just automatically think of you as a friend. And it's true. There's, especially, this cross-special side, which is the 22nd gate. The 22nd gate is not in the mammalian design. So if you have that, you automatically have a connection with any animal that carries the 12th gate. And there's this bond that is created, this friendship that's created by that particular electromagnetic connection. And then there's the 62nd gate, another cross-special gate. And again, I happen to have the 12th gate. I have the 49th gate. And I do have the 62nd gate. In fact, I have it 4 times in my chart. And this is a gate that has a very different meaning in the mammal world than it has in the human design knowledge. This is, in the human design knowledge, all about details and expressing details. In the mammalian area, this is about the alpha. So this is where you get into who's on top, who's the leader of the pack, so to speak, and who gets to manifest and be the leader of the pack. Well, that obviously means that anytime I'm around a pack mentality of animals, I get to be in the lead, and that's kind of a good thing. It's certainly played out with my dog, but it does mean that there's a relationship here in terms of the throat center and getting things done. So we do talk about this particular mammalian group a lot more in my workshop, but you can also see that some of the keynotes for this is that they're the workers. So now we'll move to the next slide. and just give you an appreciation for if you were to summarize the entire mammalian matrix and keynote that, as you learn to do in more and more human design classes. The keynote is really struggling for food and order in the now. Very much in the moment kind of beings. They're about the alertness, the instincts. They live in the moment. It's not about planning for the future. It's not about looking and analyzing and reflecting on the past. They're very, very much about the moment. They don't carry grudges. A lot of us, including myself, I had times when I didn't allow my dog to do something that perhaps she wanted to do, and it would appear that she was pouting or sulking or feeling sorry for herself, when in fact all she was doing was just behaving in the moment, picking up the energy of the moment, picking up the vibes, very much reading the signals. And that's really what animals are doing. Their way of communicating, their way of what looks like is conceptualizing, is really about a very moment-to-moment instinctive base of internalizing what does it mean in the moment. What is the communication and signals I'm picking up in my environment in the moment? And that's really what their behavior is about. So let's go to the next slide, and in the time we have left, let's talk about some of the conditioning aspects that happen between us. Conditioning is something that, as we study more and more about human design, it's really not intentional, is it? It's not like we have anything to do with conditioning. It's not that what you put out into the world you are trying to do. It's just a part of your nature. And the exchange of conditioning that takes place in the world is not intentional at all. And yet, we've learned, whatever we put out, whether you're an emotional being, you can see the implications of your emotions with the people around you. If you're feeling really low, you're amplifying it for those people around you that have an open solar plexus, an open emotional system. Well, the same holds true when you are in the world of the mammals. And so the conditioning that we put into our mammals is something that a lot of people, I don't think, have really thought about. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll introduce you to my dog. She was born in 1994. Her name was Gale Storm. She really was a Gale Storm. I didn't name her. I got her from a breeder that way. She was a purebred Labrador, and coincidentally enough, I think one of the reasons I was so much I put so much into this presentation because I really wanted to honor her in some kind of special way. Her birthday was just this past Monday, and I lost her about a year ago in October. And so a lot of what I learned about mammalian design I took kind of to process how I felt about losing her. And it just so happened that the very next semester after she died, I enrolled in the Mammalian Design program. And so Gail, you can see here, is a particular type. And just, to kind of test your memory here of what you've learned in Living Your Design, what type is reflected here in this particular design? You'll notice that there's no activations in the centers. Does anybody remember? Just type in if you can remember what type has no centers activated, no centers colored in. Yeah, it's a reflector. And what's really, do you remember how many reflectors there are in the world when it comes to humans? What percentage? They're very, very rare. Yeah, it's just about 1% or 1.8%. It's a very, very small number of humans that actually are born as reflectors. But there's a very different split of that when it comes to mammals. And again, I've got an example here of dogs, but mammals, if you were to think of that as an entire species, any guess, what do you think the percentage of reflectors would be in the mammal world? Any guesses out there? %, 30%, 50%? Well, guess 34 gets the prize because it's very, very close to 70%. It's actually 67.6%. So that's a really large percentage, and it really does, say something about, the whole role and the type and the way that mammals operate. They're very, very different in the way they operate. They're really a reflection of their environment, aren't they? They're really taking in a deep way, a lot of the energy that they have in the environments they're in. They can be deeply, deeply conditioned. Not as conditioned as you may imagine, because again, reflectors have a resilience to them, an ability to, sort of skim the surface, so to speak, but they do take in the energy of others in a very deep way. And, Gail was, of course, I was very lucky to have her birth data. It's hard to know unless you are right there when mammals, and a lot of mammals run off to give birth. It's very hard to know what their birth data is. But I did happen to know hers. And so you'll see she only had 3 gates activated, but she did have double activations and sometimes both a design side as well as the personality side. And I will go into this example in more depth in the workshop I do so that you can really understand how, after she died and I took this class, I was able to really understand her in so much more of a way that I could separate what was the conditioning she was reflecting back that was really my design. Because a lot of our pets are doing just that. They're reflecting our design. You can learn an awful lot about yourself by watching your pets. But in general, there's obviously the same mechanics. There's these electromagnetics that take place. You can actually activate certain centers in your pet. You deeply condition them with your design, and they can deeply condition you. We don't even think about that because we don't even imagine, this relationship and this cross-special aspect that we do have with mammals. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see Gail's mother, her human mother. And again, you'll see this was the conditioning that she was taking in. Here you'll see I have a very active root center, a lot of stress and pressure. It's red for me. It's very unconscious. I had no idea and still don't much of the time the stress and pressure I can take in. And so this is a relationship that, after all is all said and done, I really had to think about, the stress and pressure that this dog was under whenever we were together. And of course, the activations of my sacral center into her, this life force, very, very strong individual life force that I have. And of course, I have this activated throat center. I have all these cross-special gates. So, anybody who has the 17th gate is what a lot of people would say is really good for training, animal training. And so one of the reasons I thought my dog was a genius, and very, very smart, is because, in fact, I had a cross-special way of truly training her. But it was really through the signals, the communication, the hand gestures, the movements that she was able to, listen to my words, my sound, the acoustics. She had these tribal parts to her, but she also had these very individual parts to her circuitry. So she was a very acoustically oriented animal. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see putting the two charts together. They're actually not together, but you can imagine. Here we have her with the 28th gate. There was no connection there, so it's not like she activated my splenic system, for example, when we were together. And I really didn't necessarily put her under any stress and pressure at all. What happened is basically she was just noticing my stress and pressure. So it was interesting. She used to sit in under my desk all day long while she was alive, while I was doing all my work. And at the end of the day, I guess because I had built up so much stress and pressure, she would come over and nudge me and really encourage me to get up and, get outside. And I took breaks throughout the day whenever she needed to be let out. Or, she would throw a ball at me, just to kind of break the monotony of my work, to really reorient and refocus me. And she was relieving throughout the day the stress and pressure I was taking in. So she wasn't feeling this pressure herself. She wasn't being activated inside herself in a way that was harmful for her. But it was definitely signals that she was picking up from me. And she kept me in a state of health, actually, because she really reminded me throughout the day, am I under too much stress and pressure? Am I tired? And when I lost my dog, I discovered quite a difference in my body, my health, and, even though I'm still healthy, I don't have anything to reflect back to me when I need to take a break and stop working. It just goes and goes and goes. Like, in the U.S. we have this energizing battery commercial that talks about the ever-ready bunny, and I can really be that sometimes without this dog. But you can see, again, we didn't have, we had a similar gate. We had the 5th gate, all about routines. We loved our little routine together throughout the day. And this, when it was just the two of us, it was a very, very comfortable way of going through life. A lot of companionship without a lot of negative conditioning. And again, this is the waking moment. So if you go to the next slide, though, we will take a look at there's more to it than just your relationship with your dog. So, I'm dog parent number 2 in this chart. You can see the dogs up above. But, my husband's obviously also in this dynamic. So there's more to it than just my design. He very much had some activations with the dog. He did have the gait of being the friend, so they had a very interesting relationship. I was very close, but I was also the alpha dog of the family, and my husband was more the friend. So in the pack world, she basically would go to him when she just wanted a friend to play with. And whenever we would go out and run the dog, you could really see the dynamics of, he would just turn out to be another dog just playing along. And yet he was so active. He's a manifesting generator. He made her a lot more verbal. He definitely put a lot of pressure on her throat center. She ran around like crazy. Hyper active dog whenever he was around. And in general, now looking back, I truly understand the deep conditioning. We thought that she was the hyperactive one. She was really reflecting the powerhouse that she was living in. All this energy that we were putting out into the world, this dog was running around like crazy, really truly wearing out her body. In the end, when she died, it was really because her legs gave out. Her structure, her frame gave out. Not her mental capacity, not her spirit. It was quite interesting to watch. And such a lesson for me, as a pet owner, to really understand the deep conditioning and the reflection of our designs. You really have to, I think what saved her for so many years was my acute ability to see patterns and detail. And I knew her behavior so well that any time she didn't know when enough's enough with that open sacral center, I would just tell her, okay, we're all done. We're not going to play anymore. She would immediately stop and then go collapse in the corner. She could not know when enough's enough without me really recognizing the patterns. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm aware that we don't have that many more slides. I am aware that people did assume that this would only go an hour, and I did come a little bit late. So I'll understand if anyone wants to leave, but is it okay if I continue on for just a few more slides to finish up today? Just want to give everybody the ability. Okay. So this is a slide that I found. I think that it's really a great reflection, on the conditioning that we have and the assumption that, here's this dog getting ready to go to bed at night. This conditioning that we have, it's kind of funny to watch, some of the ways that we project onto animals and the behaviors that they learn as a result. But one of the reasons I have this slide up is because I also wanted to turn our attention to something that we really never think about when we watch their behaviors. So many of the times we've trained them. What is it going to take to survive and have a more comfortable life? They're such feel-good machines. They are these creatures that have this splintic system, this feel-good system. They are full of, unconditional love. By the way, my power just went out. I'm on a battery backup, so I think we'll be okay. It's just interesting how life works. So they're full of unconditional love. They do have the G center defined. They are these non-ego, non-judgmental creatures. And so it is so easy to assume that, they're like us. We become very dependent on them for not only safety and security, but a lot of times people bring them into the bed. A lot of people sleep with their pets. Any of you out there sleep with your pets or, very close to your pets? Any pets on your bed at night? It's okay, you can admit it. I actually had my dog not in my bed, but I had her bed right next to my bed every night. And, of course, at the time, I didn't actually realize the implications of that. But there is this sleeping state, as I mentioned before, in which all of us go through. So if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see that, here we have my chart again, but this time I've also showed you my dream rate. So all of us, you'll see, it's not just that, we take whatever our centers were defined in the waking day and, eliminate those that are not in the mammalian design. We actually take on a completely different matrix. So, in this particular case, every time I go to sleep at night, I'm also a reflector. And that is the way I am designed to be when I'm sleeping. That's my restful state. You could call it that. I'm also very activated. I have all these cross-special gates still being activated. In fact, a lot more so. A lot more mammalian gates are activated. But what's interesting about this dynamic that I didn't realize before is for years, with Gail sleeping right next to me, their auras are much, much bigger than our auras. So we were still within auric contact of each other. And we shared the fifth gate in our waking hours, but you see that I actually take on the 15th gate in the G center when I'm sleeping. So suddenly there's this connection that takes place between Gail and I when we're asleep at night. Suddenly there's this sense of identity. There's also this ability for me to turn Gail into a generator, and for me not to be a reflector anymore, but to continue to be a pure generator, while I'm asleep. So that means that I'm very, very active. I'm very energized when I'm trying to get my rest. So is Gail. She also has gates that are very territorial, that are activated. And so she would spend, I live in a hillside with a lot of wildlife around me. She would spend her nights being aware of, all of the movement outside the house, all the creatures, the deer and the raccoons and, the coyotes and everything going on out there. And she would actually get up and bark and become very territorial. We would get maybe, she probably woke me up every other hour. I got to the point where I learned to deal with it almost like having a newborn baby. But, looking back, I can now understand the implications of sleeping together, or at least in the same room. It was not healthy for us. I was deeply conditioning not just her but myself in a way that was nothing that I had intended. And had I known our designs at the time, I would have done something about that. So go to the next slide, and I'll, just share that this was also, of course, an impact that was not only on the dog, but for much of the time I had this dog, she was 14 when she died, I wasn't aware of human design. So a lot of that time, in the early days, I was also still sleeping with my husband. You hear in Living Your Design, the healthy state is to be sleeping in your own aura, which I do now. But at that point in time, I wasn't. We were all in the same room. And, what was going on with the activations with all of us was, again, the barking that she would do at night was because of the activations in the throat center coming from my husband. So none of us were really getting the rest we need. And you can see over time, there's just a completely different, we don't even imagine the dynamics of what we're doing. So if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to, share with you that as I was going through the end of her life cycle, I was very active in human design classes, and I had the wonderful opportunity when it was coming very, very close to a lot of cycle of life decisions with my dog. I had the fortune to be able to communicate with Ra. And he's, of course, an animal lover himself. He's raised, cats and dogs and been in environments with a lot of mammals. And one of the things he shared with me, was that their form, their matrix truly is built differently. And their ability to go through the end-of-life cycles, pain, a lot of things that we can't imagine is also very, very different than we have. But one thing is, true. They do have a personality crystal. So that means they are taking in their experiences. And what that's really reflecting to all of us is the one thing they really are about is love. I always thought they were here to teach us about love. But it's a two-way street. Love is the one true thing that mammals really do learn from us. So as we look around in the world around us, and we look at what is the love that we are teaching mammals, I'm glad to see that over time love has been, and the bond has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. And, I really, really, that really helped me, get through some of the last days of having my dog and, the relationship I had with her, because I recognized that it was very important to me that she take as much about love with her. And, there's ways of dying, living your design, and you can do that correctly, but you can also die correctly. And I made sure that this dog died correctly in a way that I made sure that her form, for example, was intact for at least 3 days after she died, so her personality crystal could live on. And it really was touching for me to know that the love that she brought in this lifetime is going to be there. So I'll go to the next few slides, and just a little interesting tidbit. Where do we go from here? In evolution. Well, we're in a wonderful time. Human sapiens and Transitus have a bond. We have this cross-special bond with mammals. We relate to them. We have a relationship with them. We always will. But after 2027, when mutation takes place, those babies that are born raves, which is different than the Homo sapiens, this relationship won't exist. The mutations will be taking place in the gates that are the cross-special, that bargain. They will not be able to eat meat. The relationship that goes back so prehistorically, that bond is breaking down. The bond that mammals will have with us will break down. So it's going to be, this is the time for us to really revel and enjoy the relationship we have with mammals. And so, if you're really interested in more information about this, then I've got a couple of slides to point you in the right direction. And the next slide is a self-study program you can find through the JAM. It's the one that Ra actually did a few years ago in one of his Ibiza events. It's available for download. It's $900, and you can find it under the general courses with Ra. It's about 10 hours, and it's not going to just go through mammals. It'll also go through all the other life matrices too. And then if you go to the next slide, I'm also going to be a resource since I have studied, how do you do readings for pets? How do you really understand their matrix? What are the actual themes of the gates? They do have different themes with their lines. And so if you're interested in a workshop, I'm going to be doing a group workshop. I'll probably be doing one in either December or January, about 4 hours. It'll be online. It'll get into some circuitry, more advanced things like gates, lines. If you have examples where birth data, I invite you to be able to share that, and we can take a look at some examples in the class time. I have examples of some of my own, in addition to Gail, that we'll be able to share and learn from. And if you do want just individual support, for example, or consultations, on how do you understand the behavior and the true nature of your own animals, and if you have the exact birth time and location, then I also have the ability to do individual consultations, and I'd be happy to. I think it's really important to understand, what is, just like you learned in Living Your Design, what's the difference between your nature and your nurture? Well, what's the difference of your pets so that you're there for them? And going to the last slide, I just wanted to thank you for, being here today and for listening. This happens to be a picture of a deer that I was able to capture. For some reason, it decided to come under this was last July, And this picture was taken through my window. It basically stayed there for several hours watching me. It was mostly laying down. And I couldn't quite understand. I've never seen deer come that close and curl up under my deck right by the window before. And you can see, perhaps, down that this was a pregnant deer. And so I have a little more story to share with you in the workshop in terms of the life around me in my experience with mammalian design and, you know, just observations. I've been able to really test this data to be quite factual in terms of, you know, understanding, you know, behaviors. So more on that. And I'm open for any comments or questions since this is basically the conclusion.
Carol, I want to thank you. I was really stuck listening. I didn't move at all. It was very exciting and very precious what you gave today. I'm really very happy with it. Thanks a lot for your time, for your effort, for the way you explain things. It's quite with a lot of love and passion. Thanks a lot. It also, I think, for me, it changed the way I look at animals, and I never saw it in that way. You know, the connection between us and them.
Yeah, it really was very, you know, amazing to really get into looking at their gaits are very different in terms of their themes, their behaviors. A lot of practices we have, you know, some of the rituals we go through, you know, when we go and, for example, neuter our animals, you know, the implication to the animals, a lot of things that I'll, you know, again, visit in the workshop that, again, ignorance, we just have no idea. It's interesting.
Thanks a lot, Carol, and I think you'll hear from us anyway. I found it very exciting, interesting lectures. And you work with horses as well, and cats and dogs, and all mammalians, or do you specialize in a certain type?
It doesn't matter what type it is because the matrix remains the same. And so what you learn is it doesn't matter whether it is a horse or a pig or, you know, a deer or, you know, their personalities come out in that matrix. And when you learn what the gaits and the lines are about, you get to watch that unfold. You get, you know, Dr. Andrea basically raises horses, and so her study of this, her validation of this work was by, you know, years and years of observations with exact times of birth. You know, she worked with a breeder. They watched many, many horses and the personalities and how they related to each other is all based on the designs they have. And who was, you know, all the activations can be seen that way. And in my case, again, I could witness this from both the standpoint of a domesticated pet, in which you could basically say, well, they were just learning the behaviors by what you were doing and what you were projecting. But no, I watched this with the wildlife. I've watched the life matrices not just with deer, but I've watched quail being born and hatching on my property. And, you know, it's fascinating to understand how deep the human design system truly is. It's just amazing.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carol. If nobody else has any more questions, it was for me an eye-opener, and I found it very exciting to hear and very precious, I must say. Thanks a lot.
And thank you. And bye for now.